And good afternoon, Dr. Roddenberry coming to you live from Willow Springs, North Carolina. How's everybody doing today? It's good to see you. If you join me, go ahead and say hello in the chat bar. Let us know you're on the broadcast. Today is the second lecture in the Born That Way series, where we're talking about the relative effects of nature and nurture on human beings' development. I see we had another person join the broadcast. Hello. Thanks for coming today. It's always great to see everybody. Good to see you. Good to see you. Who's on the broadcast? If you're there, go ahead and say hello. I wonder if we have Sandeep from Jaipur, India today. He's been on the broadcast last couple of days, asking some really good questions. Jaipur, I think you're a great mind, and I really like it when you do talk to us. And then I'll bet I probably have Nelissa here as well. It's always good to see you too, Nelissa. If anybody else is on the broadcast, feel free to go ahead and say hello. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see. September 14th. Okay. I want to make sure that nothing is going on. Let's see. You folks can hear me. If you're on the broadcast, go ahead and type a hello in and let me know. It's kind of interesting. I've usually seen some comments before, and I've got one person waiting. I am streaming, and I am going live. I think everything should be good to go. Why do I have one person waiting? No, okay, everything should be good. Let me check. Make sure everything's coming across this broadcast. Okay, cool. All right, we should be good to go ahead and get started. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Now, if you remember last lecture, I was talking about nature and nurture. I suggested to you that we're interested in developmental psychology because human beings change over the course of their lifespan. Developmental psychology is interested in that, specifically how we change as we get older. All other branches of psychology study the human being in a static form. Developmental psychology asks the question, how and why do we change? If you remember last class, I was talking to you about nature, nurture, the two the big developmental question that developmental psychologists face. Are human beings a product of their environment, or are they a product of our genes? If you'll remember back from Hereditary Genius, the lecture we had a couple of weeks ago, I told you that there were a group of people, social Darwinians and other animal husbandry people, Gregor Mendel fans, who believed that human beings were simply a product of their genetic makeup and that the environment had absolutely no effect on who they are. I would say that's a gross oversimplification of the story. Human beings actually do change as a result of the environment as well. So where developmental change we call maturation, getting older, puberty, the myelination in your brain, all that represents maturation. Learning is the development and change that occurs in a human being as they are exposed to different things in their environment. Okay, cool, Nelisa. I was worried. When I saw somebody was waiting, I suddenly thought the broadcast is messed up. Maybe I put out the wrong link, but I am glad to see you're here. So what we're going to do is we're going to contrast this nature-based approach with an approach in psychology that was really popular from 1900 to 1950 called the behaviorist approach. And the behaviorist approach explained to us how the environment, the ways in which the environment can cause relatively permanent change to our behavior. If you look up here, you're going to notice I have a behaviorist description of learning. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior. That is, no learning is permanent, that occurs as a result of experiences. This is different from reflexes. This is different from instincts. This is different from genes. This is how you are affected by your environment. And as I suggested to you, the behaviorist, led by this fellow John Watson, had this belief that the difference in people's life outcomes is due to the environment. If you ask John Watson, he would say, I can take any relatively physically healthy child, I can take any child who is physically healthy and turn them into whatever I want, from something really, really super stupendous like a neurosurgeon to somebody really, really bad like a bank robber. It's all about the environment. And a lot of these psychologists, ironically enough, did their research on animals. I don't know if you folks have ever seen the meme of the rat pressing the bar, of the monkeys learning, of pigeons in a cage pecking. These are all memes that were developed based upon behaviorist research that was designed to understand how the environment shapes our behavior. And there are two broad ways in which behaviorists looked at how the environment shaped our behavior. And both of these could be explained without the use of mental concepts. You didn't have to think about cognitive psychology. This was psychology before cognitive psychology. So this was learning without having to use the mind, if you will. This was mentalistic. And there are two ways in which your behavior is changed. The first is what we call classical conditioning, and the second is what we call operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is learning by association. Melissa, Sandeep, do you like psychology? Do you like psychology? Answer that question for me. I'm going to, and David, I'm sorry, you're here as well. Do you like psychology? And I'll bet if I ask you, do you like psychology, your answer would be yes. And you know why? You know why you like psychology? I'm going to bet it's because I do really cool, funny lectures and I tell lots of jokes. Here's the thing. When people hear jokes and cool stories, it makes them happy. And I just happen to be telling you about psychology while I'm making you laugh. And so you have learned to like psychology. How many of you have taken a class with a teacher that is absolutely boring, horrible, mean, and not interesting at all? Chances are you probably hate that subject. It's not because the subject necessarily bad, it's because it was associated with somebody who was incredibly boring and unfunny to be around. That's what we would call classical association or learning by association, classical conditioning. The second is learning by consequence. If you've ever, can somebody tell me, has anyone ever taught a dog how to go to the bathroom outside? Have any of you ever taught a dog to sit? Have any of you ever taught a dog to shake hands? Have any of you had your parents take away your cell phone or your video games? Have your parents ever given you $50 for making A's on your report card? Okay? If you have ever had one of these consequences and it makes you do a behavior again and again, you are learning by operant conditioning. So if you want your dog to sit down, what you do is you push on their butt till they sit down on their own. Then you give them a little cookie. And then when you want the dog to sit down, you say sit, the activating event, and you push on their butt. And when they sit down, you give them a reward. And after a while, they'll realize that if they sit down, they get a reward. That's learning by consequence, right? I'll bet you do, Nelisa, because I try to make it interesting and fun. The first time you meet a subject, it should be interesting. That uses classical conditioning to make you like the subject even more. Okay, so these are two ways in which human beings change. So I see a bunch of people sitting in front of me right now. You folks are a product of your genes. You are a product of the myelination that's occurring in your brains. You are a product of maturation, if you will. But you know what? You've also been affected by your parents, by your teachers, by your friends, because they have caused you to associate things with different outcomes, and they have taught you by providing you with consequences. So, behaviorism is the branch of psychology that tries to understand how all of those things work together. Classical conditioning is just learning by association. It starts with a reflex or something that's already built in the system. Each and every one of you likes to laugh. And when you laugh, you go to a happy place, right? So everybody laughs. So what I do is I tell a funny psychological story, and you laugh and you feel good, and you associate feeling good with that psychological story. And after a while, every time you hear a psychological story, you feel the same emotion as you would when you laugh. You get a warm, happy feeling. I don't know if you folks have ever heard of Pavlov's dogs. Has anybody ever heard of Pavlov, Ivan Pavlov, and teaching a dog to salivate by ringing a bell? Anybody ever heard that yet? I see we have 3 people in here. What he found was that dogs naturally salivate when you provide them with tasty dog food. But he found that if you rang the bell before you gave them the dog food, after a while they would salivate to the bell, even if you rang the bell without giving them the dog food. It's almost as if they associated the bell with food, and it produced what's known as a conditioned response, a learned response. And it turns out that everything that happens in life it involves classical conditioning. Anytime you see something, if it's associated with a positive outcome or another outcome that causes an emotional response, you begin to associate the emotion with that neutral object. Okay? Here's a really crazy example. No, I won't have time to do that. I'll do that maybe in webinar. But learn a little bit about classical conditioning. I've got a link over here. I don't have time because I'm way behind. So if you would, click this link that I have right here in the PowerPoint and learn a little bit about classical conditioning on your own. Okay? Now, some behavioral terms. As you're learning a behavior, the behaviorist would say you're acquiring the behavior. You're in acquisition. Sometimes an animal that you teach to sit down, if you quit giving the animal a reward, after a while the animal might not remember how to do the behavior anymore. We call that extinction. And you know what the crazy thing is? Sometimes you'll teach an animal, a dog, a behavior, and they won't do it for a they'll learn it and they'll acquire that behavior, and then you'll quit reinforcing or rewarding that behavior, and they will lose that behavior. And then, bizarrely enough, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years behavior, that learning that they've forgotten will actually come back. That's called spontaneous recovery. This is a great way to think about post-traumatic stress disorder. You're in a very scary place. You hear loud noises, and a friend of yours that you really love dies. That's a really, really sad event. You feel this sad emotion at the same time you hear loud noises and you see flashes of lights. Okay? You have classically conditioned yourself to associate lights and noise with the saddest experience that ever happened in your life, right? And so for the next few months, every time you hear an explosion, you have these sad, horrible feelings. But after a while, you come home from the war and these feelings seem to go away. And you're walking through the mall one day, and suddenly somebody drops something really loud in the mall, and you hear a loud crash, and it causes this emotional response that you've forgotten to come back all of a sudden. And a person will suddenly go into this terror fit because of a loud noise that they hear in their environment, or maybe fireworks, or maybe a fire engine, or maybe when they see some sort of emergency vehicle. And the thing is, because they will have spontaneously recovered this learned feeling that they forgot. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. But you can use, when you talk about behaviorism, they're going to talk about things like acquisition, extinction, and spontaneous recovery. Now, this guy named B.F. Skinner studied pigeons and rats, and what you'll see over here in the corner is a Skinner box. And he realized that you can change people's behaviors by doing two things, by either reinforcing a behavior or punishing a behavior. Now, a reinforcer, it's not necessarily a reward. It can be a reward, but it also can be the removal of something you don't like. But a reinforcer is any consequence that makes a behavior more likely in the future. Let me give you a good example of a reinforcer. Melissa Rosario, what if I added 5 points to your homework grade every time you came to class? Would you come to class? Absolutely you would. I'm giving you a positive reinforcer. You would come to this webinar every day if it would give you extra credit. On the other hand, Sandeep, you know what I could do? We have a final exam in this class and nobody wants to take a final exam. You know what I could do, Sandeep? I could say, if you come to all of my YouTube classes, I won't make you take the final exam. How about that? I won't make you take the final exam. Would you come to class then if I promised you that I'd take away your exam? Absolutely she would. Absolutely she would. So the weird thing is, this guy B.F. Skinner found that you could cause animals to do behaviors by either giving them something they liked or removing something they didn't like. He said he called these positive reinforcers and negative reinforcers. So if I decide to give extra credit to my students, Nelisa, I am giving positive reinforcement to get you to do something in my class. That's all extra credit is. It's positive reinforcement. My lecture better be useful for you to make a good grade. If it's not useful, you won't come to my class. I need to positively reinforce you. On the other hand, I can take away something you don't like if you do the desired behavior. We'll call that negative reinforcement. So if I tell you that I'll take away the final exam, I won't make you take it if you come to my YouTube class every day. I am using negative reinforcers to cause you to do a behavior I want you to do. Okay? And now the neat thing is, if you're a good parent, if you're a good teacher, if you're a good boss, you use these little reinforcements and rewards to get your children to do what you want. Oh, do you want to play video games? Okay, you have to clean your room first. The child cleans their room, you play the video game. Oh, you want to stay up late tonight? Okay, fantastic, but you have to finish that big project that I wanted you to finish. That's what we call negative reinforcer. And what B.F. Skinner found, and he studied pigeons and rats in boxes, he found that you can use these little reinforcements to cause a behavior to be acquired. Now, as I suggested, this is relatively permanent. So he found that if you quit reinforcing the behavior, after a while, the behavior would go away, but it would stay for a while. Now, you folks probably have also heard of punishment before. And we talk about punishment, although punishment is not as effective at training an animal or a human being as reinforcement, okay? So to be a good parent, you should punish your child maybe, but really what you want to do is reward them. Now, punishers are consequences that make a behavior less likely in the future. Uh-oh, I left out the word less. Less likely in the future. Less likely in the future. Have any of you ever disturbed a hornet's nest before? Has anybody ever played in an ant bed before? Have any of you ever disturbed a yellow jacket nest? Have you ever done that before? Have you ever done that before? If you have, you got stung by the animal. Yes, I guarantee you he didn't do it a second time because that behavior was punished. Okay? If you want to reduce the likelihood of a behavior, you can use punishment. So, the bee stings, I'll bet you $1 that your brother will never mess with a bee's nest again. That is because he received a positive punishment, something he didn't like. Have any of you ever did any of you ever do something bad and have your parents take away your phone or your video game for a day? So let's say I got into a fight at school and my parents don't want me fighting at school. So when I come home, my parents say, I don't want you to ever get in a fight again. So I'm going to take your phone away for 3 weeks. And every time you fight, I'm going to take your phone away for 3 weeks. That's what we call a negative punishment. A negative punishment, right? And so every time we answer and ask questions, everyone, yes, absolutely, Sandeep. One of the worst things that a teacher can do is make a student feel stupid for answering a question. If you do that, you have punished that student and they will never, ever, ever speak in class again. Absolutely, Sandeep. Same thing with your children. Here's the deal. When your children do things that you like, that you think is good, make sure you reinforce that behavior. And you know what B.F. Skinner found is that you have to use something the animal wants. And everybody likes to feel good about themselves. So getting a little bump to their self-esteem is always a good reinforcer, right? What Skinner found is that if you kept rats kind of skinny and hungry, he kept them at 3/4 their normal weight. They were always hungry. He could use food to reinforce them. But I would argue to you that human beings never have enough praise, and so that's always a good reinforcer. Okay. Now, here's the crazy thing. B.F. Skinner found that you don't need to reinforce the behavior every time. You can actually reinforce the behavior every second or third time and it will still work. So Sandeep, to follow with your explanation, I could tell you, I could applaud you every time you ask a question, and that would be continuous reinforcement. And that's going to cause you to ask more questions. But what B.F. Skinner found is that I could reinforce you every second or third time. I could use partial reinforcement, and that would still work to train you. So here's the deal. If you want to teach your dog, once you teach your dog how to sit, you don't need to reinforce them every time they sit. Instead, you only need to give them a reinforcement every couple of times, and it'll still keep that learning fresh. Now, the neat thing, one of the really odd things that Skinner found, remember when we talked about behavior extinction? As I suggested to you, all behaviors in the end can be lost. And if you look at this chart right underneath me, you'll see how the behavior frequency is decreasing in all of these lines. This behavior is being extinguished. They are forgetting it. But what B.F. Skinner found was that if you use partial reinforcement to condition the behavior will actually be less prone to extinction. It will stay around longer. So once you reinforce if you really want your dog to learn a behavior, reinforce them not every time, but every other time. Don't always give your dog a treat when they go outside, or otherwise, the first time you don't give them a treat, the behavior will go away. That's what's known as the partial reinforcement effect. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense, folks? Okay. Now, one thing that I do not have a whole lot of time to talk about is this concept called shaping. And how do complex behaviors occur? Okay, how do complex behaviors occur? Sure, you can teach a dog to sit down. Sure, you can teach a dog to raise their hand up like they're shaking hands. But when you go to the circus, how do you see those animals that do those crazy skills like balancing on balance beams or putting a ball on their nose and walking around? How do animals in movies do these really complex, dramatic scenes? For that matter, how do human beings learn complex behaviors? The concept that was used to explain this was called shaping. And shaping is a process of teaching complex behaviors using positive reinforcements. And here's the deal. In order to create a complex behavior, you start with a simple behavior. It will start to like surfing. David Daughtry, wow, that is a brilliant, brilliant question. The question is, are human beings motivated by the reinforcement, or is there something inside a human being that causes them to do that? And you bring up a great point. There would be this approach. I can't believe you asked that question. It's a brilliant question. These people would be called the social cognitive approach. And the fellow you want to look up is Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura, okay? And what this guy, Albert Bandura, realized, he argued that you can reinforce somebody for a while, David Daughtry, but then that reinforcement, they internalize that and it becomes a part of who they are. Does that make sense, David Daughtry? That is a brilliant question, brilliant question. Now, here's the deal. A behaviorist like B.F. Skinner, B.F. Skinner would laugh at that question, David. B.F. Skinner would actually call you foolish. According to B.F. Skinner, the dog doesn't have the ability to develop an internal desire to like that. Instead, B.F. Skinner, being a behaviorist, would say it's all about the reward. B.F. Skinner was unwilling to go past the rewards in our environment. He argued that the human, the organism, wasn't important. He said really the internal qualities didn't matter. That's a great question. B.F. Skinner would say one thing, Albert Bandura would say the other. Now, in terms of shaping, aside from that great question, if you want a dog to surf, you got to start them out by just teaching them how to stand on a surfboard and feel comfortable. Once they feel comfortable that and you reinforce that behavior, you then move the surfboard and you try to have them stay on the surfboard while it's moving. If they can do that, you reward that. Then you push the surfboard and let them move on their own. And if they can do that without falling off, then you reinforce that behavior. Now, the deal is, if you took that dog initially and put them on a surfboard, they would have no idea what you wanted, and they wouldn't know what behavior to do to be reinforced. But what you did is you took them step by step, getting closer to the behavior that you want through what are called successive approximations. Successive approximations. So when you go to SeaWorld, I don't know if you've ever been to SeaWorld, and you'll see the orca whales, and they'll jump up out of the air, do a 360 spin, and then fall into the water. That behavior is trained through successive approximation. What they'll do is they'll wait for the whale to come up above the water, just crest in the water, and they reinforce the cresting, coming out of the water just a little bit. And after a while, the animal will get so excited that it'll jump all the way out of the water, and they give it a lot of reinforcement then. and then it'll learn that it gets reinforcement by jumping all the way out of the water. And then they quit reinforcing that behavior, and the animal gets so excited trying to get their reward that it'll jump out of the water and fall over on the side, and they reinforce that. So then the animal learns it has to jump out of the water and fall over on its side. Great question. Animals, right. One of the unique things about language is it's symbolic. And we do not think that animals have symbolic, abstract abilities. Okay, so pen doesn't give you any hint on it. Is pen is just a sound, and you've learned to associate those two things and create a concept. So the animal may hear the sound and relate that to a behavior they need to do. Do they understand the concept of the word? Probably not, Sandeep. That's a great question. And that actually is where evolutionary psychologists or comparative psychologists are. They're trying to figure out how much do animals know relative to human beings. And, you know, we used to be pretty arrogant thinking that there were only a few really intelligent things that humans could do, like solve problems, like use tools. But it turns out that other animals do pretty crazy things. But whether or not animals have true linguistic ability, I'm going to say no at this point, Sandy. Great question. Another great question. Wow. I should just answer questions rather than talk. Okay, now, here's what I was going to talk about today. We're already half an hour late. That's fine. I'm at least going to go ahead and start. Now, here's the deal. As I suggested to you, there are two viewpoints on human beings. There's one viewpoint, human beings are born that way. Their genes create them, and people develop through a process of maturation. Or the nurture aspect would be, hey, all people are born the same, and people change and develop based upon learning. That is, their environment shapes them. So two ways of thinking about how we become adults is to say it's either nature or it's nurture. And those represented two fundamental poles in the what we might call the theory of what it means to be a human. You know what, Sandeep? We'll get to language in a minute, and I'm going to address that question. But I don't even think apes can do that yet. But we can talk about that. All right. Now, so that represents, if you will, a fundamental developmental issue. And if you want to say you're a psychologist, you have to appreciate the biology and maturation of the human brain, and you have to represent behaviorism. The two fundamental forces that shape the human being. Now, what you can do is you can then make the argument, how do those forces affect human beings as they develop physically, mentally, and emotionally? Okay, so human beings develop emotionally, they develop mentally, and they develop physically. What you can do is you can look at these developmental issues and ask the question, what parts of these are nature and what parts of these are nurture? So what I'd like to do is introduce you to some areas of research. Now, one of the interesting things that you can note about human beings and lots of other mammals is that we are a group animal. Human beings are pack animals. Just like dogs, just like chimpanzees, we exist in social groups, right? And you can see this, you can trace this need back to different brain areas, and you can trace it back into our close relative ancestors, and you can see it so strongly mimicked in different animal species that you can begin to say, wow, there must be something innate, fundamental, and biological about this mechanism that puts human beings together, right? What is the glue that sticks us all together? Is that glue something we learn, Sandeep? Okay. Or, which means that maybe not all people will have it. Or is it a fundamental genetic property of the human nervous system. So we can ask the question, where does love and friendship and community come from? Is it something that we learn from our environment, or is it a fundamental human need? Does everybody understand this debate and how we might ask this question? The observation is that human beings love being in groups, and human beings without groups are sad. We know this, okay? That's a great observation. Now, in the 1930s, when behaviorism ruled the world, okay, it was thought that mommies and babies developed a close relationship because the mommies fed the baby. All right. In a sense, if you ask a behaviorist, if you ask John Watson, why do babies seem so attached to their mother? John Watson would say it's because the mother reinforces the baby with breast milk. Do you see that link right there? Do you see how that's a behaviorist argument for why babies enjoy their mother? Okay. And you may ask the question, why do people find boyfriends and girlfriends and romantic others? Because sexual sex is reinforcing. So what you can do is you can use an environmental explanation to answer the question, why do people seem to want to congregate? Why do we like bonding with one another? Now, this guy named Harry Harlow down here, you'll see the picture, he thought that was wrong. He instead thought that human beings have an instinct, a need, if you will, a fundamental need to bond with another human being. Okay, now, why did he think that? Well, he looked at this guy, Konrad Lorenz, an anthropologist or a sociobiologist, who found he actually who demonstrated this concept called imprinting. Did you know if you take right before the eggs are born, baby geese are born, if you'll take the mother away, and when the babies are born, if you're the first thing they see, those geese will start following you around the barnyard like you're their mother goose. That's called imprinting. And if you want to find that, Google imprinting on YouTube. And there are lots of pictures, videos of this guy, Konrad Lorenz, in geese following him around, because animals tend to bond with the first thing they see. And what this guy, Harry Harlow, discovered was there's this critical period, remember critical period for last lecture, when human beings need and want to bond with another organism. And that organism doesn't have to be the same color. It doesn't have to be genetically related. It doesn't have to be a male or a female. What a human being needs, what an animal needs, what a mammal needs is another organism to bond with during the first few months of life. And what Harry Harlow did was he took these monkeys and separated them away from their mothers at birth. And he gave them two mothers he put them in a cage with two mothers. One mother, if you'll see over here in this picture, kind of had this soft, fuzzy terry cloth and was very nice to snuggle. And the other mother was very uncomfortable, but had a food bottle. And what Harry Harlow found was the monkey would eat from the cold, uncomfortable mother, but the baby would spend 23 hours a day snuggled up against the soft mother. And he realized that there was something fundamentally human or fundamentally necessary built into the system about your need for snuggling and warmth and close contact. Okay, so all human beings seem to have this need, this innate need. Now, he found this with chimpanzees. You couldn't do this with human beings, but there are examples of children who are neglected early in childhood. And the outcome for children who are neglected the first couple of years of our life is absolutely tremendous. These children often suffer from a disorder called reactive attachment disorder, and they are incapable of ever really building a warm human relationship. Yeah, the baby monkey is so cute. If you're actually interested in Harry Harlow's famous monkey study, there is actually a 30-minute documentary they made about Harry Harlow where he shows all of his experiments with these monkeys. It's in black and white, and it goes over his theory about monkeys and their need for attraction. Now, one of the things that he would do too, and you might not like this, Nelisa, is he would take these little infant monkeys and he would scare them really, really bad. And he would watch which monkey mother they would go to. And he found that when you scared these monkeys, they would run and snuggle on their warm, comfy mother for protection, right? Yes, you can find that documentary on YouTube. Harry Harlow, I forget the name of it. Oh, gosh, I don't remember which one it is. What's it called? Hold on, let's see. YouTube. I can find it for you. It's called Harry Harlow. Oh, I misspelled it. How about that? I misspelled it. It's a cool documentary. The Dark Side of Science. It's God. I'll have to find it after class. It's about 30 minutes long. And it's actually pretty dark because he took these babies away from their mothers. And it turns out these babies were horribly disturbed. Here's the crazy thing. He would take these monkeys. Will we get the same results with a human baby? We can't tell experimentally, but there are case studies, Sandeep, of children. Actually, there are thousands of them every year. If you look in, where children are sent when they're abandoned, you can see abandoned children's homes. There are children who are neglected the first couple of years of your life, and it absolutely wrecks them. In fact, look up reactive attachment. This is a disorder frequently that you will see with children who have been neglected. So the crazy thing about this study is when he didn't give these babies a mother at all, and he waited till they were like a year old, he would scare them again. He would put the two monkeys in there for the first time, and when he would scare them, the monkeys didn't even have the ability to run to the mother for comfort. So it's almost as if these monkeys did not know how to go to another person for comfort. Think about all the people that you've met that have trouble with intimacy in love and have what we might call, quote, trust issues. Some of these trust issues can be traced all the way back to infant attachment styles. Now, cool experiment. This neat lady named Mary Ainsworth, who was very interested in Harry Harlow's work, she wanted to see if there were differences in how children bonded with their parents. And she set up this crazy experiment where it was an observational study, what we call a laboratory observational study. She would bring children, infants into the lab with their primary caregiver, typically their mother, and over 15 minutes, right, didn't have mothers, yeah, exactly, right. Great question, Lisa. I'm glad you asked that. And that sort of goes to this idea. Here's the crazy thing, infant attachment. So during the first couple years of your life, you will bond with your primary caregiver. Typically in our matriarchal society, it's going to be the mom, but it can be a dad, it can be an uncle, it can be anybody. It's the person that you trust and love. And if you've ever seen an 18-month-old child, what you're going to notice is that when you walk up on a strange 18-month-old child, a child that you've never met before, that child will immediately be afraid of you if they don't know you. Now, this is not abnormal. This is what's known as stranger anxiety. And typically when you walk up on a child that's between 6 months and 2 years of age, they are going to run close to their mother or their primary caregiver. That's their secure base. They're usually going to run over there and want to be held, or they're going to touch their parent. What you'll notice is they run over and touch their parent. And that's because their parent is a secure base for them. That parent, when they start to get nervous, because that 18-month-old child doesn't know you and they haven't developed the ability to understand who you are. So they run over to their mom and their primary caregiver, and that gives them a secure base. Now, the secure base helps the child control their emotions, because when you're afraid, you don't want to explore or play with toys, Nelisa. When you are terrified, you don't engage in playing or exploring or learning. So the first thing is you have to be calm. So having your mom or primary caregiver around is a secure base. Now, when somebody comes around, you go to your mom or your primary caregiver, your secure base. Now, one of the other things you're going to notice is when a 12-month-old or a 14-month-old's mom or primary caregiver gets up and walks away, that child will usually start crying. This is also another very normal experience called separation anxiety and separation protest. And this is because that mom, primary caregiver, provides this secure base. Now, what we know is when the secure base is there, the child's emotions are lower. Okay, they're not afraid, they manage their emotions, and they can explore and do all the cool things that you need to do to learn. You explore, you play with things, you learn things, right, Nelisa? Now, what Mary Ainsworth wanted to do is she wanted to see if there were different ways in which children attach to their moms. So she had a laboratory observation. She would bring children into the lab with their primary caregiver, put them into a room, and then she had a 15-minute experiment where the child would be left alone 2 different times by the mother, once with a stranger and once without a stranger. And both times, all children would cry when their mom left alone. All children experience separation anxiety. But what Mary Ainsworth found is that the children differed and how quickly they were able to calm themselves back down when their mom came back into the room, when their primary caregiver came back into the room. And she decided that the difficulty of changing their emotion was due to how secure their attachment was with their mom. What you're going to notice with most children, is that when their primary caregiver comes back near them, they immediately calm down and go back to normal, doing their little exploratory stuff. And Mary Ainsworth found that about half the children did that. But she found that some of the children, when the mom came back in, they actually would come back to the mom, but they were angry with the mom, and they wouldn't look at the mom, and they would be pushing on the mom, punishing the mom. They were what she called avoidant. They weren't easily soothed, but they were angry with the mother. The other children seemed to be super duper clingy. When mom came back, they grabbed a hold of her and loved on her, but just couldn't seem to stop crying. Okay, what causes an ambivalent or avoidant child? Great question. Mary Ainsworth suggested that it was probably due to caregiver responsiveness. She believed it's how you respond to your child's emotions during that first year. If you are consistent in responding to your 7 and 8-year-old and 9-month-old's needs, that child will begin to feel confident that you will meet their needs. On the other hand, if you are absent or inconsistent during the first year, your child develops a model in their simple little baby brain that people aren't reliable. And so that child will tend to focus on that. Even when they have a person, they're going to still focus on that because they've learned that people are unreliable. Isn't that crazy? You learn how to be a parent the first year in your life. Now, here's the deal. What's due to caregiver responsiveness? You need to be consistent in meeting the child's needs. And here's the other thing. You need to stay relaxed when your baby is upset. Sometimes when people's baby starts crying or your baby hurts themselves, you'll get all upset too. Oh, I'm so sad. And you may try to mimic how sad and emotional you are to emphasize empathy for your child. It actually turns out you're providing a lack of emotional stability. You actually are the calm in the storm. When your baby is crying is when you need to be the most calm, right? So you shouldn't say, oh, when you cry, it makes mommy cry. No, 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 no. Now you're not being the secure base. Instead, it's okay if you cry. Mommy is here. Do you see the difference? One provides a secure base, and one provides an insecure base. So here's the deal. Think about nature and nurture. Number one, how is it nature? Well, it turns out we all have this fundamental mammalian need. We have a critical period when we need to meet this fundamental mammalian need. That critical period we call the attachment period. However, depending upon how we are treated during that environment, depending upon the environment and how the environment responds to us during that important need, we will develop into what you might call a secure attachment style or a non-secure attachment style. Does that make sense? Now, raising, here's one thing. I'm just going to make a mention of this because I think it's very important, and parents need to do this. Now, here's the deal. The first year of your child's life, you are giving them nothing but warmth and love. You are teaching your child that you accept them, that you will take care of them, and you really do care for them. You want them to understand that you are going to be responsive to their needs. That's where most suburban parents are good. Where most suburban parents fail and where you need to really work on is after the first year. You got to then start instilling accountability in your 1-year-old. That's like, I said no, you got to go to bed. You have to do this, you have to do that. You actually do have to learn how to provide some degree of control with your child. So the best parent is that parent whose child knows they love them, but who also institutes control. Now, most parents give their children nothing but love, and they don't want to ever disappoint their child. So they engage in what we will call the permissive parenting style, right? Now, and that's no good for your child. On the other hand, I grew up in the South, and Southern fathers are all about nothing but control. And your Southern father doesn't want to be warm and loving to you because, unfortunately, we associate that with weakness. So, what you're going to see is a lot of Southern fathers are all about demands and control, but not love. They're going to be more authoritarian if you are. Okay? And then, yes, as you say, Sandeep, some parents just are going to be uninvolved with you. And that's the toughest thing. And I find that very sad to hear, Sandeep. And this is not the kind of parents that you want. And the fact that you are so doggone intelligent, your questions and your thoughts are so talented, makes you kind of a one in the million, Sandeep, because you've still developed into what I think of as a quite intelligent and thoughtful adult. Now, when you're being a great parent, on my best days, when I'm the best parent, I have strict rules for my boys, but they also know that dad really loves them and is there for them. I'm sort of that authoritative dad. Now, here's the deal. All of us at our worst periods are going to be authoritarian to our kids, sometimes permissive to our kids. But if you really want to be a good parent, what you need to try to do is to stay in the authoritative zone as much as you possibly can. Raising successful adults, is it nature or nurture? I believe that all children are born with positives and negatives, okay? but it's your job to help your child with their negatives and accentuate their positives. Some children are just born shy. You know what? You as a parent can put them in situations where they can learn not to be afraid of their shyness. Some of you are going to get children with who have difficulty controlling their emotions. It's up for you to put them in situations where they can learn to control their emotions. So, are children born good or born bad? Really, it depends. Every child is completely different, and you have to be a human being as a parent and see what it is your child needs. My child has emotional control problems. I really need to help them deal with that. My child is really rather shy. I need to help them deal with that. It's your job, in a sense, to provide the environment that fits your child's needs. Had, you don't put them, that's a great question, Melissa. What you do is, life is inevitably about disappointment. So you teach your child, instead of avoiding disappointment, you teach them how to deal with disappointment. So if you take your child on a play date, that play date will end. If your child cries, one thing you could do is just stay there and deal with it. Nope. Instead, you say, it's okay to cry, but we're going to come back next time. We have to leave, but we're going to come back. This is not the last time we're going to be here. So what you do is you teach your child how to deal with negative emotions. Your child wants a cookie. No, it's breakfast time. We can't have cookies right now, but you're going to get cookies later. So I'm not saying no forever. I'm saying no for now. Think about most of the people you know. It's pushing them not to survive. Exactly. Here's the deal. Some people think that the goal of a parent is to keep their child from ever being unhappy. That is not your goal, and that is a permissive parent. Your goal is to help your child deal with the things that make them angry. So you're not trying to put them in situations. I misspoke when I said that, Nelisa. But your 2-year-old's going to run into situations. They're going to want to play with a toy that they can't play with. You're going to help them deal with their emotions. Your child's not going to want to share their cookie. You're going to have to help them deal with your emotion. So you sort of coach them. Some people believe that you don't coach a 2-year-old. They're in their terrible twos. They're just like that. Yes, they're like that because they haven't been coached. This is the critical period when you teach your child how to deal with the ups and downs of life. And that's the really important part. So, is raising adults, are we born that way, or are we do we develop that way? It depends. It depends. It depends. Okay, we've run out of time, but you can do ask the same sort of thing with language development. It's part nature, part nurture. Read about that. And Jean Piaget, who's had a theory of how our mental abilities develop, he had a theory that was more nature, and I contrast him with Lev Vygotsky, whose approach was more of a nurturist. Okay. Earlier topic: do people respond more effectively, punishment or rewards? That is a great question, David. People do not respond nearly as well to punishment as they do to reinforcement. The best training is through reinforcement. Reinforcement teaches your child what to do. Human beings are agentic. They want to know what to do. Punishment teaches your child what not to do. So I just stand around there. Spend more time teaching your child what to do. You know what I mean? Rather than what not to do. The second thing is, punishment only works as long as the punisher is around, okay? I'm going to do what I want when mom's not around. I'm just going to avoid doing it when mom is not around. Does that make sense? And finally, if you are going to use punishment, you need to use it the first time the behavior occurs and every time the behavior occurs, and it needs to be fairly noxious to work. So if you want to stop someone from doing something, the first time they do it, you must punish them. and you must punish them every time they do that behavior. But even then, you're going to build a better human more efficiently if you focus on learning what to reinforce rather than what to punish. And I hate to sound like a liberal namby-pamby, but honestly, whatever works quickest is what I like to do. So reinforcement's better than punishment. Okay, folks, great questions. Fantastic. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. David, great question at the end. Sandeep, as always, brilliant. Melissa, thank you very much for your questions. You're always great. Hey, for those of you who are enrolled in my class, I'm sorry, Sandeep, this isn't you, but for the others, I hope to see you in tonight's webinar when we talk about nature and nurture more in depth. Hey, folks, you have a great day. Take care, and I can't wait to see you next Tuesday. Bye.